The fall of the Chicago Bulls may have only just begun, and what they're revealing is deeply troubling. Chaotic locker rooms, confusing decisions. Reinsdorf began cleaning house, firing Karnisovas and Eversley in response to another disappointing season. John Paxson was at the center of the franchise from 2003 to 2020. In other words, this will be only the third leading front office executive for the Bulls since the early 80s. Spoke to reporters the next day in Washington, D.C. With all of the misinformation floating around on social media, they immediately began to process what the aftermath meant for the team and their futures. It definitely took a while for it to sit in, about what had been happening behind the scenes for months. Team sources described a growing disconnect between the front office and the rest of the franchise. People didn't know the plan. They didn't know the process. We needed to move on with a clean slate and start this thing over. That quote, "people didn't know the plan," is probably the most damning sentence, because what it reveals is that the confusion wasn't just about this season. Behind those closed doors at the Advocate Center, and to understand how the Bulls got to this breaking point, to a moment when everything looked like it was going right. When Arturas Karnisovas was hired out of the Denver Nuggets front office in April 2020, Karnisovas' reputation was rather strong as the number 2 for an emerging Denver Nuggets team. He brought in Mark Eversley from Philadelphia shortly after, replacing Jim Boylan with Billy Donovan, who had just come off a successful tenure coaching the Oklahoma City Thunder. Karnisovas overhauled the roster with a bold deal for Nikola Vucevic at his first trade deadline, before adding Lonzo Ball, Alex Caruso, and DeMar DeRozan in the summer of 2021. Caruso and Lonzo Ball wreaked havoc defensively. Zach LaVine was a terror in transition. By the All-Star break of the 2021-22 season, the Bulls were number 2 in the Eastern Conference, with a 38-21 record. Chicago was back. The city believed. The national media was paying attention, and then Lonzo Ball's knee gave out. That injury didn't just take a player off the court, it stole the soul of that team. Ball's injuries that season derailed the team's trajectory and took more than 1,000 days off his NBA career. He wouldn't play another NBA game until the start of the 2024 season. But here's where the story turns, because the front office made a devastating choice in the aftermath. They chose to wait. Ball did not play in another NBA game until the start of the 2024 season, but the front office kept the core of that team intact for 2 more full seasons without Ball ever appearing in a game. 2 full seasons of treading water. 2 full seasons of clinging to a nucleus that had peaked one December. A team source later told ESPN, "We took too long to pick a lane. The Lonzo thing just really messed them up. We saw that success early on and didn't have the foresight to pivot early." But there's another layer to this story that insiders have been whispering about for a long time. The same team source described the team's initial trade for Nikola Vucevic in 2021. The Bulls traded Wendell Carter Jr., Otto Porter Jr., and 2 first-round picks for Vucevic and Al-Farouq Aminu. As the team's original sin, think about that language, the original sin. This wasn't just a trade that didn't work out. This was the trade that set the entire Karnisovas era on a path toward mediocrity. Team sources said recently Karnisovas has expressed remorse for the move, saying a deal like that, to give away 2 first-round picks, should have been the team's final move toward contention instead of an initial one. Instead of being the finishing piece, Vucevic was the starting point of a push that the front office built everything else around. And when things fell apart after Ball's injury, the Bulls were stuck. No first-round picks to rebuild with, no flexibility to pivot, and a roster that wasn't good enough to compete, but too expensive to blow up. Ever since the franchise traded Jimmy Butler III in 2017, Chicago has vacillated between short-circuited rebuilds and a misguided attempt to move into contention. The Bulls' series of moves in 2021 left them hovering in the middle with no path to relevancy. That middle ground, too good to tank, too bad to contend, became the defining feature of the Karnisovas era, and the people inside the building knew it. The numbers don't lie, and the numbers for the Karnisovas-Eversley era tell a story of breathtaking stagnation. The team won 39 or 40 games in 3 consecutive seasons before the 2025-26 campaign. Year after year, the results looked almost identical. Not enough wins to matter, not enough losses to draft a franchise-changing talent, and a front office that seemed paralyzed by its own indecision. The lack of a franchise cornerstone player was glaring, and Karnisovas' reluctance to launch into a major rebuild was a big source of frustration among Bulls fans. Rather than give the team the best shot at winning the lottery, he stressed patience and not skipping steps. But here's the part that makes this even more complicated. It wasn't entirely on Karnisovas. Karnisovas and Eversley maintained throughout the past few years that they were working under the constraints of ownership. Team sources told ESPN, Donovan and the team's ownership were both hesitant to embrace any type of tanking, which put the front office in something of a position to continue chasing mediocre playoff spots. That cycle largely prevented the Bulls from acquiring true franchise-altering talent and made them a regular in the play-in tournament. So you had a front office that couldn't fully commit to rebuilding because ownership didn't want to lose on purpose. And you had a coach whose competitiveness made it culturally impossible to strip the roster down and aim for a top draft pick. The result, the Bulls spent 3 consecutive seasons bouncing in and out of the play-in tournament, never advancing, never rebuilding, just existing. Meanwhile, the roster decisions continued to baffle people around the league. They made transactions that baffled the league, such as trading Alex Caruso for Josh Giddey, misjudged the value of their own players, such as Patrick Williams and his 5-year, $90 million contract, and frequently waited too long to trade players who were coveted around the league. The Caruso for Giddey swap in particular became a symbol of the front office's erratic decision-making. Caruso was one of the league's premier defensive guards, a player opposing coaches game-planned around, and Chicago shipped him to Oklahoma City for a young point guard whose fit alongside the rest of the roster was questionable at best. That trade happened in the summer of 2024, the same offseason where they let DeMar DeRozan walk. Eventually, the Bulls traded away the top 6 players: LaVine, DeRozan, Vucevic, Ball, White, and Caruso from their February 2022 team. The only first-round pick they received in return, a return of their own first-round selection in 2025. Read that again. The Bulls traded away 6 core players, including an all-star in LaVine and 2 other borderline all-stars. And the only first-round pick they got back was their own pick that they had previously traded away. That is an astonishing failure of asset management, and the people inside the organization watched it happen in real time. They took way too long to move on and didn't get nearly as much in return as they could have. Dosunmu and Coby White, 2 success stories for their player development staff, were moved at this year's deadline too, and Chicago didn't get a single first-round pick back for either of them. The frustration inside the building was no longer simmering. It was boiling. Going into the 2025-26 season, there were reasons to be cautiously optimistic. The Bulls began this season 5-0 and won 6 of their first 7 games, for the first time since the Michael Jordan era. Yet, they began to plummet in the standings due to injury issues. They got back to .5 unnards in January, but have endured 4 losing streaks of at least 5 games this season, and are 6-27 in their past 33 games. It was a free fall, and when the February trade deadline arrived, Karnisovas finally did what so many had been begging him to do for years. He blew it up. The Bulls tore up their roster leading up to the trade deadline, dealing Nikola Vucevic to Boston, Kevin Huerter to Detroit, Coby White to Charlotte, and Chicago product Ayo Dosunmu to Minnesota in an effort to shake up a franchise mired in mediocrity. Karnisovas called it an effort to get out of the middle. But here's the problem. The returns were abysmal. Karnisovas made 7 trades before the deadline. The Bulls mostly loaded up on second-round draft picks and didn't get any first-rounders in return. They added multiple veterans in the process and failed to add any first-round draft capital for players like Ayo Dosunmu and Coby White. A source later said ownership was underwhelmed with the pair's moves at the deadline and had hoped for a clearer direction. The front office had finally committed to tearing things down, but the execution was so poor that it made things worse, not better, and the frustration emanating from the organization was palpable. Frustration grew among fans as head coach Billy Donovan proceeded to play some of those veterans over the team's new youngsters. It was as if the roster had been reshuffled, but the vision, or lack thereof, had stayed the same. And then came Jaden Ivey. Among the players they acquired were Jaden Ivey from Detroit, hoping the number 5 pick in the 2022 NBA draft could regain the form he showed before knee surgery. But the Bulls waived him last week following anti-LGBTQ+ comments about religion he made in videos posted on his Instagram account. Ivey had been sidelined since Feb 11 and appeared in just 4 games for Chicago. The last straw was the fiasco surrounding guard Jaden Ivey, who was acquired from the Pistons on Feb 3. then waived March 30th for conduct detrimental to the team. For social media remarks equating LGBTQ with unrighteousness and criticizing the NBA's promotion of Pride Month. The optics were devastating. The Bulls had traded for a player at the deadline, held him for less than 2 months, and then had to cut him loose under a cloud of controversy that became national news. The front office had somehow turned a bad season into a humiliating one. While the Bulls have long been the butt of the joke, the negative headlines had only surged in recent weeks. It was impossible for ownership to ignore, particularly as the reality of another lost season settled in. The breaking point didn't come in the offseason. It came after a controversy the Chicago Bulls could no longer ignore. Just days after the Jaden Ivey fallout pushed fan frustration to a boiling point, the organization made a sweeping front office decision that had been building for years. And behind the scenes, the Chicago Sun-Times had already been reporting that the pressure was mounting. The Sun-Times first reported in December that ownership was turning up the heat on Karnisovas and Eversley, heading toward the trade deadline in February. Joe Cowley of the Sun-Times wrote that ownership is weighing if the mess has gotten too large for them to fix. It had. The day after the firings, Michael Reinsdorf held a press conference that, depending on who you ask, was either a breath of fresh air or a reminder of the same old Bulls. Reinsdorf admitted plainly, "We failed. Now, we're in a position to get this right." He outlined what he's looking for in the next front office leader. He said he is looking for someone who is process-oriented and not afraid to pull the trigger. He also wants a better communicator. Reinsdorf said, "I want someone who's really strong in communication, not just internally within the organization, but also externally. What are we trying to accomplish? What is the plan? Our fans have a right to understand what we're trying to accomplish." That last part is telling, because it's essentially an admission that the previous front office failed to communicate, not just with the fans, but with the people inside the building. It lines up perfectly with the team source who told ESPN that people didn't know the plan. As for Billy Donovan, Reinsdorf made his position abundantly clear. Reinsdorf made it clear, the Bulls' current status is not Coach Billy Donovan's issue. "I think he achieved really good results," Reinsdorf said. "Not the results we wanted, but that's not because of Billy." He went even further. Reinsdorf said, "If I interview someone and they're not sold on Billy, they're not sold on a Hall of Fame coach. If someone's not interested in Billy as our coach, and if Billy wants to be our coach, and someone's not interested in that, then they're probably not the right candidate for us." That is a staggering amount of protection for a coach whose teams have missed the playoffs 4 straight years. Donovan had a 467-411 record in 11 seasons as an NBA head coach. With Oklahoma City and Chicago, he led Florida to back-to-back NCAA championships during a 19-year run, and was inducted into the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame in September. Reinsdorf clearly believes the failure in Chicago belongs to the front office, not the sideline. Reinsdorf said he wanted Donovan to have a greater voice in team building. "We'd be crazy not to want Billy's input in player acquisition from players around the league," Reinsdorf said. He even entertained the idea of Donovan moving into a Brad Stevens-type role, coaching while having front office power. For his part, Donovan addressed reporters before Tuesday's game and struck a measured, forward-looking tone. "I just know the last 4 years, we have not won at a high level. I want to win at a high level. I want to be a part of that," Donovan said. Meanwhile, names are already swirling for the vacant front office position. Former Bulls players Kyle Korver and Luol Deng have emerged as potential candidates to join the new-look front office. Deng has reportedly suggested Masai Ujiri as a potential leader for the Bulls. Reinsdorf revealed that the Bulls plan to hire a search firm, noting, "Yesterday, I got about 60 people texting me they wanted the job. I'm not going to do it that way. We are going to hire a search firm. And what about the players who are still there?" The Bulls have been saying it's just business a lot this season. Chicago is 29-49, traded away half of the team mid-season, and has already clinched its worst record under Donovan. Hard decisions will have to be made this spring and summer, and the front office shakeup is only the beginning for a franchise that is desperately in need of a rebuild. Now that the executives who drafted Williams are gone, his future is in doubt, even with 3 more years left on his contract. Every player on that roster is wondering the same thing: who's next? Despite the turmoil, the Bulls enter the 2026 offseason with a rare opportunity. They hold one of the largest cap spaces in the league, have just 9 players under contract at roughly $93 million, and control a projected top 10 pick along with a potential additional first-rounder from Portland. There is a silver lining here if you squint through the wreckage. Whoever steps into the Advocate Center to run this franchise will inherit one of the cleanest financial slates in the league. The question is whether the Reinsdorf family, the same ownership group that kept Paxson around for 17 years and let Karnišovas meander for 6, can actually get this hire right. They kept around Gar Forman and John Paxson at least 7 years too long before making the change to Karnišovas and Eversley, and they should have removed this duo 2 or 3 years ago. The pattern is undeniable. The Bulls move slow, hold on too long, and then start over from scratch, having wasted years. This time, though, the players and people inside the organization made sure the world knew what was really going on behind those closed doors. The disconnect, the lack of a plan, the years of indecision, the trades that netted nothing, the embarrassments that piled up until ownership had no choice but to act. Chicago is a basketball city with a basketball history that casts the longest shadow in the sport. 6 championships still hang from the rafters of the United Center. And right now, the people who play and work in that building are telling you, the next era of Bulls basketball has to be different. Whether it will be is entirely up to the people who own the team. And if history is any guide, Bulls fans have every reason to be cautiously terrified.